11:37 p.m., October 22, 2020, Spokane, Washington. The night shift at Riverbend Regional had just ended when 3 young nurses crossed the parking lot under sodium lights and vanished between 2 cameras that never overlap. Their mothers woke to missed calls and silence. The city slept, the river didn't. What happened to Harper Nolan, Sienna Ruiz, and Kala Huang? 6 months later, a different kind of alarm would rise from beneath Spokane streets, forcing the investigation open. Stay with me as we follow the trail that should not exist, and the bond that refused to break. By morning, the water would answer back, unforgiving. At first, the absence looked like exhaustion. A late text that didn't land. A key fob that didn't ping. Patricia Nolan reheated coffee she didn't drink and stared at the driveway she knew too well, repeating her daughter's name as if a rhythm could summon footsteps. Across town, Elena Ruiz pressed redial until her cheek hurt, listening to voicemail like it might change on the next try. Machen stood by the sink without turning on the light. They'd exchanged pleasantries at hospital fundraisers, 3 women orbiting the same hallway. By dawn, grief welded them together. Detective Rowan Pike started with geometry, not feelings. He mapped the lot and painted the gaps. 2 cameras, 32 feet of dead zone, 5 seconds on foot. He pulled badge logs from facilities, checked NARC cabinet access at 2309, cross-referenced overtime approvals, and isolated every plate leaving Riverbend between 2315 and 2345. He did not speak in promises. He spoke in timestamps. Harper in dermatology and adult reconstructive procedures, Sienna in adult oncology, Kala in emergency medicine. Different floors, same elevator bank, one habit. They walked each other to the cars. Rumors showed up before evidence. Someone whispered about a traveling clinic recruiter. Someone else swore they'd seen a white van idling near the loading dock, a claim that melted under footage. In the first week, the city gave the case a shape, flyers taped to grocery windows, porch lights left on all night, a vigil on the hospital lawn that dared the sky to look away. Banks confirmed no activity. Phones went dark like a door slammed from the inside. Pike hated closed systems. He looked for leaks. Adrian Keats kept appearing at the edges. Board certified, admired, surgical precision in both reputation and hands. He had trained Harper on post-op protocols that lived between cosmetic and reconstructive work, the kind that gets billed quietly and documented loudly. He spoke at the first meetings, offered to pay for a billboard, gripped a microphone with surgeon stillness. Then he faded, claiming night shifts and a new practice on Maple Avenue. It was a reasonable excuse. Most reasonable excuses are. The mothers didn't do detective work so much as they refused to stop. They learned hospital acronyms faster than new recipes. They traded dates, cross-checked memos, kept a spreadsheet of people who said, "I'll keep an eye out." They didn't sleep in the same room, but they kept the same schedule, driving past the lot at odd hours to measure absence with headlights. When the first snow came, Patricia scraped ice from her windshield while the radio bled static, and she told it a secret. "You will not outlast me." Spokane at night looks honest. Freight trains confess their weight. The river keeps no secrets about current. On Trent Avenue, you can hear the city's service arteries exhale. Steam lines, lift stations, the municipal pulse that makes clean water look easy. Pike ran his timeline again and again, like a doctor ordering the same test because the patient looks worse, not better. Somewhere the case was bleeding, and he hadn't found the wound. He interviewed janitors, scrub techs, after-hours radiology. He stood in the stairwell where a badge shouldn't have been used and felt the metal rail still cold from a hand he couldn't name. He noted a purchase order anomaly, oxygen cylinders billed to a personal account, not a facility one, a clerical error with edges too sharp to be a mistake. He wrote it down without underlining it. He knew the difference between a hunch and a map. He needed a map. In the quiet hours, the mothers talked about ordinary things the way soldiers talk about weather. Patricia remembered Harper labeling meal prep containers with a surgeon's neatness. Elena recalled the winter Sienna shaved her head with a friend who had breast cancer and wore the new look-like armor. May thought about Kala's playlist. Fast for long drives, slow for sterile corridors, something you could grip when your hands were gloved. They weren't building altars. They were building endurance. An investigator can be both careful and desperate. Pike kept the case out of the press until he couldn't. He asked Riverbend for 6 months of access logs to areas where Keats had no clinical reason to be. The report landed on his desk like a tremor: late-night entries, locked storage, a quiet trail leading nowhere obvious and everywhere important. He stared at a date stamped in the margin and heard the city speak in machines, the hum of pumps, the slow turn of valves, the municipal heart deciding to cough. By morning, Spokane's water would change color, and with it, everything else. At 6:12 a.m. the calls began: brown tap water across a 4-block stretch off Trent Avenue, a metallic taste, low pressure, something wrong under Spokane's skin. By 7:03, a public works crew in orange coveralls had a trench open and a section of 36-inch pipe lifted like a rib. What rolled out should have been inert debris. It wasn't. A tight sphere, lashed with surgical tape and wire, thudded onto a tarp and bled only mud. The foreman sliced carefully, like he'd learned the motion on fishing nets. Blue, green. 3 sets of scrubs, weighted with soaked shoes, stitching still intact, colors not yet surrendered to the city's water. Detective Rowan Pike stepped in without theater. He didn't touch, didn't speculate. He asked for scale markers, angled the evidence photographer to kill glare, and had a pop-up tent turned into a field lab in 12 minutes. Cotton swabs found what the rain couldn't rinse away: microscopic traces that turn into numbers, then into names. The rapid kit was a blunt instrument, but it was enough: profiles that aligned with reference samples the mothers had given in October. Patricia Nolan pressed a fist to her chest and stayed upright. Elena Ruiz whispered thank you at the ground. Machen closed her eyes and made her breathing count to 4. Pike ran the timeline against the fabric itself. Dyes fade underwater, but not this little, not in 6 months. Someone had kept these, then dumped them days ago. That meant movement. That meant a hand. Crime scenes don't end where you find them. They begin where the physics says they must. He called in a hydraulics engineer from the county, a woman who treated pressure gradients like biographies. They fed her flow data from last night's peak, mapped terrain slope, modeled reversal at the junction where the clogs sat. The simulation returned an upstream corridor, a short list of manholes, an arrow pointing back toward Riverbend and the industrial cutouts that serve it. Gloved officers canvassed the access points. One manhole cover wore faint drag marks like someone had set it down too quickly. On the curb, adhesive flecks from medical-grade tape and a thread of green polyester caught on a rough edge. Nothing cinematic, nothing you'd see unless you were already looking for it. A plainclothes tech bagged the thread and grinned into his mask, not from joy but from recognition. The knot pattern in the wire told a different story. A right-handed wrap, tensioned with pliers, cinched the way you'd secure gear in the back of a van. A fingerprint examiner took the wire as if it might flinch. The lift she pulled wasn't pretty, but it was legible enough to run. The hit came back on a name that had been lurking in dead files and drop ceilings. Mason Dake, outstanding warrants, a habit of disappearing between jurisdictions. Pike didn't announce it to the crowd. He wrote it on the 3rd line of a legal pad, below the words access logs and oxygen cylinders. He let the 3 items stare at one another until the shape emerged. A man who wanted a different face, a doctor who could provide one, a city whose pipes were now confessing. News vans arrived before the second tent could go up. Reporters leaned over tape, asking if this was the break, if the mothers could please speak to the fear the town felt. Patricia kept her answers brief and human. Elena lifted her chin in that way families learn when they decide not to cry where their kids might someday see the footage. May watched every movement at the edge, where the line between curiosity and interference blurs. Behind the cameras, a silver BMW idled 2 minutes longer than a normal driver would, then slid away when a boom mic turned its way. In the lab tent, the engineer explained how the blockage couldn't have formed at the trench. The ball had to be introduced higher, then driven down by surge. She pointed to a printed flow map, ink still drying. 2 likely drop points. One less than a mile from a shuttered surgical pavilion, its glass dusty, its utilities still whispering to the grid. Pike circled the pin and didn't say the name out loud, not yet. Instead he asked for a utility truck manifest, a list of padlocks replaced in the last quarter, and Riverbend's maintenance requests for the wing where elective procedures borrowed space after hours. The mothers stood together, not as witnesses but as ballast. When the wind hit the tent, they held the pole steady. They didn't ask Pike for certainty, they asked what they could do that wouldn't ruin evidence. He told them the truth. Stay close, stay connected, keep telling me what you remember even if it feels small. He watched their faces settle into resolve, the kind that makes a detective feel less alone and more afraid of failing. If you're still with me, keep your eyes here, because this is the stretch where investigations either stall or start to sing. Details you'd scroll past begin to harmonize. A purchase order in a personal name. An access badge in a place it shouldn't be. A car that shows up when dignity does and leaves when microphones do. A city speaking through its pipes, insisting that secrets are heavy, and heavy things sink until pressure lifts them. So who lifted the pressure, and why did they pick this week to do it? Patricia Nolan parked across from Keats' Aesthetic Medicine and watched the glass front as if it were a screen that might flicker and give up a frame of truth. Noon light cut through the lobby. A receptionist rearranged folders, smiled at no one in particular, and then stiffened when a man in a black motorcycle helmet stepped inside. He didn't remove it. A door on the hallway opened. Dr. Adrian Keats appeared in a slate jacket and moved fast, 2 fingers pressed to his temple like he could hold the day together by force. They faced each other a beat too long. Through the pain, Patricia saw the doctor's hand rise, palm out, a plea or a boundary. The helmeted man jabbed a finger toward the back, toward the corridor that led away from patients and into storage. The receptionist looked down and pretended to type. Detective Rowan Pike didn't chase the moment. He collected it. He kept collecting. Purchase orders told him who a person thinks they are. The office manager at Riverbend coughed up invoices with reluctant efficiency, and a pattern surfaced. Oxygen cylinders ordered in small, odd lots, billed to a personal card under Keats's name, delivered after hours to a side entrance, signed for with a stylus stroke that never matched itself twice. A follow-up request pulled serials for portable monitors reported, misallocated, from the hospital's inventory months earlier. The numbers lined up like coordinates. None of it proved a crime. All of it proved intention. Across the hall from Keats's suite sat a vacant unit with paper on the windows. The property manager had a key and a story. 10 nights back, the alarm pinged for movement at 2:41 a.m. When he arrived, the air was sharp with epoxy and something clinical that didn't belong in a dark shell. He wrote it off to contractors and a broken sensor because he wanted the smallest explanation. Pike asked him not to want that again. Elena Ruiz took a different tack. She posted in a Spokane neighborhood group with the steady voice of someone who has already done the hardest thing, and strangers responded like citizens. Who rides the black sport bike near Maple Avenue at midday? No plates visible in photos, aftermarket pipe loud enough to rattle a cafe window. Us and hobbyists compared angles and frame stampings, proposed a model, tracked the same bike idling on footage from a gas station half a mile away. Time stamps wrapped around Keats's lunch hour. None of it was a smoking gun. It was smoke that wouldn't blow away. Mei Chen, who rarely spoke first in a crowd, sat in her car and cataloged smaller truths. A collapsible stretcher in the back of a silver BMW. Plastic bins labeled with wipe-off marker. A folded mylar blanket punched into the corner like it had been packed in haste. She texted the details to Patricia and Elena, then to Pike, and then she put her phone face down because she didn't want to watch the typing bubble start and stop. Pike took Riverbend's access logs to a quiet desk, the way a carpenter takes wood to light. Keats's badge had ghosted through 3 restricted areas in the last month: medication storage, sterile processing, a basement utility corridor that exists mostly for pipes and mostly for people who aren't doctors. Each use was off schedule. Each time had a shadow. A maintenance ticket submitted the next morning for a light that flickered or a door that stuck. The hospital runs on forms. People hide in their margins. He underlined the basement entry and drew an arrow to the map printout from the engineer's tent. The arrow reached, almost politely, toward the industrial corridor that fed the clogged line. He sent a pair of detectives to Keats's clinic with a pretext: community outreach about the water issue, routine checks on medical waste handling. They didn't ask until they saw what they came to see. The doctor smiled too quickly, gestured toward a disposal log that looked fresh from the printer, and kept his body between them and a door labeled supply. The outreach team left with nothing but timestamps and the taste of disinfectant they couldn't name. Patricia saw Keats again at dusk, moving a hard case from the trunk to the rear door, alone, fast. The case was scuffed, stickers half peeled, the kind you'd expect to follow a musician, not a surgeon. When the latch caught, he glanced over his shoulder at the empty lot the way people do when they're sure they're unobserved. She filmed 10 seconds and stopped. Elena watched the clip twice and said the quiet part, "We are too close to be careless." Pike doesn't believe in coincidences, he believes in calendars. He added deliveries, badge pings, bike sightings, water surges, and the argument behind glass to a grid and watched the squares fill. A private practice in debt needs throughput. A man with warrants needs a new face. A city's blown line needs a source. The pattern wasn't elegant. It was stubborn. He signed 2 requests, one for a judge, one for a tactical team, and left his office before the ink dried. Keats's phone lit up an unknown number, and whatever he heard made him look at the ceiling like help might drop from it. Patricia Nolan saw the silver BMW drift past the clinic sign and turn right without signaling, the motion of someone who knew every crack in Maple Avenue. She called Elena and May with a steady voice she didn't feel and pulled out 2 cars behind, far enough to be forgettable, close enough to keep the glint of that trunk latch in sight. The bike appeared first, the same black sport model they'd screenshotted for Pike, slipping into traffic like it preferred to be hunted. When the road thinned toward the city's edge, the bike shot ahead and the BMW followed. Not a chase, more like a rendezvous where both sides already knew the coordinates. Patricia called Detective Rowan Pike on speaker and read street names as if she were reciting a spell that could keep them safe. He told her to stop before the turnoff and park where she could see without being seen. She listened. They all did. Maple Crest Surgical Pavilion materialized out of weeds and dust, its name still stamped on the facade like an apology. Once open, now forgotten. The bike cut across the cracked lot and idled near a side door that had no business being unlocked. The BMW pulled into shadow and exhaled 2 men, Adrian Keats with a hard case and the rider who finally stripped off his helmet. A square jaw, scorched skin where ink used to be, eyes that scanned for threats and owed nobody courtesy. May said the name like reporting weather. Mason Dake. Patricia filmed 10 seconds, then turned the phone to the building, not the men, so the footage would be about place, not provocation. On the line, Pike said units were rolling and to stay in the car no matter what they felt. They didn't argue. They balanced courage with care and waited. Police lights don't make noise until they need to. The first cruiser parked out of sight lines, then 2 more boxed the exits, and a plain white van that never draws attention took the angle closest to the door. A tactical team moved like a single organism, announcements crisp, commands proportional, every syllable designed for compliance. Keats emerged first with both hands visible, face pale, jacket misbuttoned, a man who had just met the end of his version of events. Mason came next, slower, chin up, fingers fanned to prove emptiness. He stared at the lens of a body camera as if daring it to blink. While officers secured the yard, Pike led a second element inside. The smell hit first, disinfectant over damp drywall, the echo of a building taught to carry whispers. Rooms coughed up their disuse, cracked tile, a toppled stool, tape residue on painted cinder block where a sign used to be. He followed the map he'd drawn in his head from the engineer's printout, past a junction closet and down a hall that had once known isolation protocols. The door was latched from the outside. He announced, waited, announced again, then used a tool designed to be kinder than a boot. The door yielded. What answered was faint but human, a voice that could be anyone's until it said a name. Harper Nolan looked smaller but unmistakably herself, eyes taking inventory of faces until one became home. Sienna Ruiz's breath came shallow and even, the practiced cadence of someone who knows how to measure panic and keep it from multiplying. Calla Huang sat upright against the wall, both hands flat on the mat as if grounding herself. None of them were tied. They didn't have to be. Hunger and fear do the work of rope without leaving a mark. Medics moved with tender speed, vitals, blankets, quiet assurances that mean more than the words themselves. Pike stepped back so the first person they would see beyond a uniform was a mother, then another, then the third. Patricia said Harper once, not a question, not a plea, just a statement that stitched the room back together. Outside, the evening collected itself into sirens and radios and the soft thunder of news gathering. Elena stood 12 feet from the ambulance door and didn't cross that line because the paramedic asked her to trust the next 10 minutes. May whispered thank you to the emptiness for holding until the help arrived. Pike had Keats separated from Mason and began with simple, verifiable questions. How did you gain access? Why the oxygen? Why the monitors? When did you last enter Riverbend's restricted areas? Keats tried to borrow the language of necessity and medicine and ran out of nouns that would excuse him. Mason spoke without being prompted, a stream of I can show you where that sounded less like bravado and more like exhaustion. He said he'd thrown the hospital uniforms down a line because he was tired of waiting for promises, because he wanted leverage that would force a decision. He said the word leverage like someone who'd learned it the hard way. Back inside Maple Crest, officers cataloged a space converted without finesse. A rolling cart with missing drawers, a trash bag full of packaging that shouldn't have left a hospital, a battered cooler you'd expect at a tailgate, not in a shuttered clinic. No theater, no ceremony, just enough to keep 3 adults alive and unseen. Pike photographed the latch and the hinge and the scratch marks on the frame where someone had opened the door too quickly too many times. He signed off on chain of custody forms and stepped into air that smelled like rain about to start. Then the engineer from the trench called him back with something simple and hard to ignore. The flow map put one likely drop point at a manhole that shares a utility easement with Riverbend's basement corridor, the same corridor Keats's badge had touched when nobody watched. Harper Nolan spoke first because silence felt like a second captivity. In a room washed with warm light and the soft hiss of oxygen, she fixed her eyes on Detective Rowan Pike and put the story in order the way a nurse organizes a tray, clean, deliberate, without ornament. She had noticed the numbers before she noticed the danger. Insurance claims billed for procedures that didn't happen, supplies signed out with no patient attached, a pattern of after-hours authorizations that looked like clerical noise until you graphed them. She told Sienna and Calla because they understood systems and because none of them believed they were fragile. They made a plan to document and escalate. That plan ended in a parking garage with a chemical smell and a sleep that did not belong to them. Harper didn't dramatize what followed. She located it. A shuttered wing retrofitted on the cheap. A door that latched from the outside. Light that came on when someone remembered. Food delivered at intervals that taught the body to wait. Mason Dake had been the one who brought water, boxes, medication when fever threatened to reorder time. He said little. He moved carefully around the edges like a man who wasn't sure which wall would give first. He carried a phone that rang once, always at night, and he stepped into the hall to answer. They heard only his side. It's not ready. I told you, I need the kits. And the click that means you've been hung up on by someone who believes they own the clock. Sienna Ruiz took over when Harper's voice thinned. She described days not by dates but by sounds, valve squeaks, distant compressors, a motorcycle arriving like punctuation. She remembered a paper inventory sheet left under a plastic lid, the kind Riverbend uses in sterile processing, with a serial number column and a set of initials, AK, inked too hard, indents visible in the next page. She saw a purchase order bearing a personal card instead of the clinic's and wrote the last 4 digits on her palm with the stub of a pen. She memorized the name of an anesthetic on a label so she wouldn't forget it later. She said this calmly, like reporting a lab result. When she looked at Patricia and Elena and May, her mouth trembled and then steadied itself. Calla Huang added the kind of detail investigators miss and nurses never do. The oxygen regulator in the room had a sticky knob at 2 liters. Someone had over-tightened it, then backed it off, leaving a bite mark in the brass. The portable monitor had a hospital asset tag half-scraped but not gone. Under light it read RBM-17. The tape sealing a bin was the wide, matte kind clinics buy in bulk, not the narrow hospital roll. The coolers smelled faintly of bleach and machine oil. These specifics didn't indict anyone by themselves. Together, they built a diagram you could hold. Pike let the room breathe between paragraphs. He matched their fragments to the stack of evidence coming in from Maple Crest and Riverbend: serials, logs, deliveries, a run of replacements for padlocks on a basement corridor that shouldn't have seen traffic. When the flow map engineer arrived in scrubs under a jacket, Harper nearly laughed for the first time. The city's voice, the one that had pushed the case open, had a face and a calm that felt like competence. The engineer confirmed what the numbers already suggested. The ball of scrubs had to be introduced upstream through an access point that shared an easement with Riverbend's lower level. Convenience disguised as coincidence. Mason didn't lawyer up immediately. In an interview room that smelled of coffee and copier paper, he talked like someone who was tired of audience work. He said he was supposed to make a problem disappear and couldn't. He said the doctor had promised a different face and kept moving the date. He said he threw the uniforms because leverage moves the unconvinced. He didn't use the doctor's name. He used the phrase "your surgeon," like the pronoun could carry shame by itself. When asked who connected him with Keats, he offered a former patient with a side hustle and a burner phone saved under the contact name Rook. He described a meeting place under a rail overpass where engines drowned second thoughts. Keats's account landed with a softer thud and less oxygen. He floated necessity. He floated threat. He referred to the women as staff, as if employment could shrink a person. He said he had never set foot in Maple Crest's isolation hall until today and blinked when Pike read him the dates his badge had coaxed open doors at Riverbend after midnight. He said he used personal cards for supply orders because of a billing glitch and smiled like the word should earn him sympathy. The smile didn't travel to his eyes. When shown a photo of the asset tag RBM-17, he said he couldn't be expected to account for every piece of equipment in a hospital that size. He was right about the scope, wrong about the responsibility. Outside the rooms, the mothers built a quieter system. They rotated rest so no one collapsed in triumph and missed the next hour. They asked simple questions and wrote down the answers so the future wouldn't edit the present into something easier. Patricia thanked the medics each time they adjusted a line. Elena stood where Sienna could see her first if she opened her eyes. May took calls, filtered offers, fielded reporters by saying "we will speak when we know, not when you want." Evidence tends to nest. A ledger inside a drawer inside a desk that looked empty under casual light. When Pike's team imaged Keats's clinic drives, they found a spreadsheet disguised as a vendor template with columns that shouldn't be neighbors, procedure codes, cash advances, initials. In the corner, a note, Aroth, Q3. Or could be Rook. It could be something worse. When they pulled Riverbend's vendor approvals for that quarter, a second initial kept repeating in signatures that sent supplies to places they didn't belong. One access badge remains unexplained, and it isn't Keats's. The charges came in a stack that felt heavier than paper: kidnapping, conspiracy, insurance fraud, unauthorized access, professional misconduct. Adrian Keats stood in County Orange and tried to borrow the room with posture. Mason Dake sat smaller than his file suggested, cuffs turning his shoulders inward, voice steady as he described the deal that never materialized. He didn't soften his part. He didn't frame himself as a savior. He said he kept them alive because he couldn't cross the line he'd agreed to cross, and because he thought survival might buy him a way out. He called it a calculation. Patricia heard mercy threaded through the math and didn't say so. Detective Rowan Pike worked the unsolved column like a splinter. One access badge was still wrong. The signature repeating on vendor approvals was still an R. When the forensics team cracked the spreadsheet from Keats's clinic, they found a hidden tab named Q3_Reauth and a column labeled escrow, a word that shouldn't sit next to procedure codes. The signature Royne, crooked, hurried, matched a contract liaison in Riverbend's revenue cycle, a consultant who was supposed to bridge hospital and clinic billing during the pandemic surge. Rook was not a burner phone myth. Rook was a man with a laminated badge and a habit of approving exceptions. They brought him in on a Thursday when Spokane smelled like rain and hot breaks. He tried to treat the room like a meeting, asking for an agenda and copies of what they'd be discussing. Pike slid over photographs instead, asset tags half-scraped, delivery logs that jumped the fence between accounts, a still of the basement corridor where his badge pinged at 12:41 a.m., a week before the uniforms found the pipe. The consultant said he'd lost that badge months ago. Security footage showed him wearing it the next day. When he asked for water, his hand shook. When he said he never met Mason Dake, Mason identified him by a scar at his hairline and recited the first 3 digits of his phone number. Keats tried a final pivot and found no floor. He blamed pressure, debt, institutional blind spots, anything that would spread the stain thinner. The prosecutor countered with names and dates and a human chain that held. In courtroom air that dried out throats, Harper Nolan testified in the same voice she uses to calm patients before a needle slides in. She described discrepancies without adjectives. Sienna Ruiz offered the numbers and the neat way they line up when you don't want them to. Kala Huang pointed to a photograph and said, quietly but clearly, that she had watched that door open and close and counted the nights by the squeak. No spectacle. No crescendo. Just women who refused to let anyone else narrate their lives. Recovery did not obey a headline. It came in ordinary increments. Calories tolerated, stairs climbed, the first night any of them slept for 4 hours without jerking awake. Patricia learned to relax her jaw before it ached. Elena stopped checking the hallway every time a gurney squeaked by. May kept a notebook of good minutes. Harper laughing at a bad joke, Sienna asking for a book, Kala insisting on signing her own discharge papers with a hand that didn't want to stop trembling. The hospital set up a secure wing where the 3 could heal near each other. Their doors stayed open during the day so conversation could bridge the distance trauma tries to impose. Riverbend changed, not with a press release but with plumbing and policy. The city installed pressure sensors and anomaly flags along the line that failed, so the next confession from the pipes wouldn't need a flood to be heard. The hospital built an anonymous channel that routed around titles and egos. A nurse could report an irregularity and know it would be audited by someone with no stake in smoothing edges. Vendor approvals moved to a rule set that couldn't be overridden by a single signature. The basement corridor got a camera that didn't blink. Mason took a plea. Cooperation carved years off a sentence that still had weight. The court noted what he hadn't done and what he had, and kept both truths in the room at once. Keats was convicted on every count the jury could reach without speculation. The consultant folded late and pled to conspiracy and fraud, his badge clipped into a clear evidence bag like a small, failed argument. On a June evening, Spokane gathered with candles that didn't ask for TV lights. Harper, Sienna, and Kala watched from a hospital window, 3 shadows framed by soft glass. Patricia said the city looked different at night now. Elena said no, the city looks the same, but we finally know where to look. May, who had learned to speak when it mattered, said the quiet thing out loud. We're not afraid of the dark, we're afraid of what we ignore. We don't get to choose whether storms come. We choose whether we build drains that talk early. Pay attention to small mismatches, numbers that don't add up, doors used at odd hours, exceptions signed by the same hand. Tell someone and write it down. Stand in pairs. If you're ever the one who can turn and see, say what you see. It may be the difference between silence and survival.